Around 120 years ago, in this mansion on Halsted Street on the west side of Chicago, a burglar broke in through the window. After helping himself to some things, the owner of the mansion, a woman named Jane Addams, woke up and told him to leave through the front door. As he left, she told him to come back the next day so she could help him find a job. The man did come back, and Jane Addams did help him find a job. This wasn't an ordinary mansion. It was a settlement house called Hull House, and Jane Addams had been leading it for years. Settlement houses were usually run by educated, progressive women like Addams. They served the working-class immigrants of major cities. Chicago had Hull House, New York had Henry Street Settlement, Cleveland had Hiram House, and so on. It was here in these settlement houses where immigrants took English lessons, art classes, home economics, and physical education. The idea was to teach immigrants American values, specifically middle-class values. This gets at a fundamental belief of the progressive movement. People can change. They can better themselves. Reforming the system went hand in hand with reforming people. And to reform people, you needed to reform people's environments. In 1890, a Danish immigrant named Jacob Riis published his best-selling book, How the Other Half Lives. It was a book of photos of the tenement neighborhoods of New York City. These photos depicted families living in dark, cramped, filthy apartments called tenements, or orphan children living on the streets. The country had never seen anything like this before. It was impossible to even photograph these neighborhoods until flash photography came along, a brand new invention of the Gilded Age. Flash photography used flash powder to illuminate dark spaces. Few spaces were darker than the tenements of the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which had become the most densely populated piece of land in the country. Riis hoped his photographs would draw attention to how the other half lived, and it worked. The book helped lead New York State to pass the Tenement House Act of 1901. It mandated that apartments be built with windows, ventilation, and toilets so as to prevent the spread of diseases like tuberculosis. Riis is a perfect example of a successful progressive reformer, someone who worked within the system to effect real change to people's material conditions. Healthy material conditions led to healthy habits. One of the most unhealthy habits was alcohol. The United States had always loved its saloons, dives, and bars. With so many saloons, it was easy for the working poor to spend the little extra money they had on drink as a way to escape their material conditions. This is where Carrie Nation came in. Carrie Nation was part of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, and she had first-hand experience with the evils of alcohol. Her first husband died from alcoholism. She set up a shelter of sorts in Kansas City, Missouri for women escaping alcoholic husbands. The movement to ban alcohol, called temperance at the time, had already been around since before the Progressive era and had already scored some victories. For example, the state of Kansas outlawed the sale of alcohol in 1881. Yet, there were still plenty of saloons doing business out in the open. Law enforcement tended to look the other way, either because they drank themselves or took payouts from business owners, or both. Carrie's second husband suggested she walk into a bar in Kiowa, Kansas to smash the liquor bottles behind the counter. This she did with brickbats and bottles, although later she would be known for using hatchets. While Carrie Nation might seem revolutionary, she was thoroughly progressive. She was an educated woman with a teaching degree. She was fiercely Protestant, believing it was her God-given mission to rid the land of alcohol. She was fearless. In Enterprise, Kansas, she was beaten. In Topeka, she went to jail. This inspired people to come out to support her, and she gained a national following. Like most progressives, she believed changing material conditions, in this case, taking away people's access to alcohol, would improve everyone's lives. However, there were deeper cultural reasons why progressives crusaded against alcohol. Big cities had the most saloons. The stereotype was that immigrants in these cities were specifically fond of their drink, Irish and German immigrants in particular. Banning alcohol would lead immigrants to the middle-class Protestant American value of sober living. Nations certainly had more success in Kansas than in places like New York, where the cities were much bigger. This just confirmed the progressive assumption that alcoholism was disproportionately an immigrant problem in the cities. Banning alcohol would be tough, but what if you can get at the source? What if you could instill American values in the children of immigrants so they would grow up never wanting to take a drink? Progressives were the driving force behind the public education system. This would be a tough battle. First, progressives would get no help from the federal government. It was too big for the feds to handle, too expensive with too many variables. Also, would white Southerners want to fund schools for black children? Would farmers want their kids to attend school instead of learning the family business? The feds wouldn't touch a public school system. Progressives would have to do it through the states. Until this day, public education is funded and regulated mostly by state governments. Second, most of the biggest cities already had some form of public schooling. Most of them were limited, with children of varying ages in the same class, the old one-room schoolhouse. Also, the laws requiring children to attend school were lax. Most immigrant families in cities expected their children to work. School would be a needless distraction. Therefore, progressives campaigned for child labor laws so kids could go to school. They campaigned for laws requiring school attendance. They required schools to serve a variety of grade levels and teach a variety of subjects. They required schools to hire qualified teachers. These teachers would need to be educated, which meant they would be mostly middle class. Since the job involved working with children, most teachers would be women. In short, the new professional teaching force became highly progressive. Public schools were where the children of immigrants learned American language, history, and values. They served a similar purpose to the public schools on Native American reservations: assimilation. Not every family appreciated this. Many immigrants feared their children would forget their language or abandon their Catholic or Jewish religion for Protestantism. Some cities catered to the wishes of parents, offering classes in both English and the language kids spoke at home. Some cities did not. Some parents enthusiastically sent their children to school while others resisted. In New York City, it was a common stereotype among teachers that Jewish children were gifted, motivated students, and Italian children were unruly. It's amazing how little the teaching profession has changed since the Progressive era. It remains a middle-class profession. It is still dominated by women. Racial and ethnic stereotypes about children still exist. And from a teacher's perspective, they are still called upon to do the impossible. The biggest name in education during the Progressive era was the philosopher John Dewey. His books, like The School and Society or The Child and the Curriculum, attained almost a holy status among teachers. Dewey tested out his education theories in the laboratory school at the University of Chicago, where he taught small classes of mostly well-to-do kids. His progressive model of education stressed that teachers should find out what interests their students and guide them on how to learn about it. There should be real-life learning, field trips, problem-solving projects, and lots of dialogue. The only problem was that teachers who read Dewey's books worked in large classrooms with no resources, teaching students whose families have never been to school and didn't speak English. Most teachers found that Dewey's noble idea of progressive education just wasn't possible for them. Any teacher today will tell you a similar story. They are expected to touch every soul, inspire every child in school systems that are not set up to work that way. This leads teachers to become frustrated and burnt out. Was the progressive model of changing people through shaping their environments even possible? Improving housing conditions, like Jacob Riis, certainly did improve physical health. But the crusade to change habits in settlement houses, saloons, and public schools was a much tougher fight.